First.
Okay.
Okay, don't start yet. Okay.
Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Pandemic Paranoia Podcast, the show where we break down how misinformation and conspiracy theories spread during COVID-19, one episode at a time. And I'm your host, Sean, joining from my tiny overworked laptop camera here on Zoom. If my screen freezes mid-sentences, just pretend it was a very dramatic academic pause.
Yeah, and I'm Sonam. I'm dialing in from my bedroom. I've rearranged this room so many times during the pandemic. I think it qualifies as a personality trait now.
And I'm Aldi, coming live from a location I'm in refill because I'm still recovering from reading too many conspiracy theories this week. Honestly, I feel like my brain needs a vacation, preferably an island with no Wi-Fi.
Yeah, so today is a big one. We're diving into episode 8 with a theme of global perspectives, different countries, and different narratives. And this episode is special because it reminds us that although the virus was global, the stories people told about it were incredibly local.
Exactly, Sean. COVID-19 wasn't just a health crisis, it was a cultural mirror. And every country reflected a different fear, a different political tension, a different history of public trust or distrust.
It's actually kind of fascinating and also in a depressing way. Like you think a virus would bring people together with one shared understanding, but nope. Yeah, like humans say, let's remix this with our own political drama, cultural baggage, and also a lot of unresolved social issues.
Well, that's the thing. Conspiracy theories don't appear out of thin air. They grow in specific environments. Certain patterns repeat, but each country shapes its own unique version, depending on the political climate, the level of trust in governments, religious and cultural beliefs, media literacy, economic anxiety, and lastly, historical memory.
Yeah, for example, in some countries, people blame technology. Like, that is so weird. Like, 5G towers sending out bad vibes. And like the other slang terms, the other pseudoscience terms people were running with at that time.
In other countries, like foreigners were blamed. It came from outside. They were hiding something, that kind of like sort of narrative, fear of other as a tale as old as time.
Yeah, and then you had those religious narratives as well. COVID is divine punishment, COVID won't infect believers, vaccines are religiously forbidden, and so on.
Yeah, and let's not forget also about like the internal political ones. People say the government manufactured the crisis, the political opposition made it worse on purpose,
Mhm.
lockdowns are a plot, vaccines are population control, and so on.
And based on my theories that I'll read a lot, my personal favorite category is when they say like there's elite masterminds controlling the world theories, like Bill Gates, like there's shadow governments, aliens, lizard people, you name it. Like some of the stuff I read my Wi-Fi want to uninstall itself.
Mm. Okay, so let's move on then. So today we're gonna take a global tour, but it's not gonna be one of those fun eat pastries in Paris type of tours. It's more like visit the countries through the lens and of conspiracy chaos.
Yeah, so today we're going to focus on four regions where conspiracy theories spread intensely, but each for very different reasons. First, we have the United States, where political identity shaped everything. Second, we also have Brazil, where leadership and messaging clashed with science. Third, we have France, where historical distrust of government and big pharma set the stage. And lastly, we also have Indonesia, where religious narratives guided the public response.
And each of these countries, we hope that it can provide certain lessons because each of the countries they have own case study in how misinformation adapts, like the virus mutated, and so did the conspiracy theories.
That's right, Aldi. And I think the important thing here is that these events weren't random and they grew in the soil of existing issues. When people feel uncertain, scared, and overwhelmed, everybody reaches for explanations, and that happens even if those explanations are like completely disconnected from reality.
Yeah, so that's why throughout this episode, we're not just listing conspiracy theories. That's very boring. We're going to look at why they made sense to people who believe them and how cultural context shapes the spread of misinformation itself.
So for our listener out there, throughout this episode, uh, thinking of it like a global diagnostic, like what do different societies fear when a pandemic hits, and what stories do they create to cope that fear.
Spoiler alert, everyone. None of these stories were boring.
All right, let's dive in. Our first stop on our conspiracy world tour is the United States. Let's kick things off with the United States. Honestly, United States is one of the most fascinating, chaotic, and let's just say eventful arenas for COVID-19 conspiracy theories. If misinformation were an Olympic sport, the US would have swept the podium.
Yeah, you're not lying there, Sean. Gold, silver, and bronze, I think. They're winning everything.
They might have been also hosted the after party.
Yeah, but like seriously though, the US had this perfect storm of ingredients like political polarization that was already bubbling over a presidential election year, fragmented and personalized media ecosystems, and decades of mistrust toward federal institution. Add a global crisis and stir, boom.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Sean. And I think that mistrust in the US government didn't just develop overnight. They've had a long cultural history of skepticism, whether it's been towards the government, the pharmaceutical companies, tech companies. Actually, you could consider, and if you really consider, it could be every major institution. They've had some theories towards it. It's like a national pastime for them.
Exactly.
Yeah, one of the biggest factors was actually a political identity. In the US, COVID measures like wearing a mask, getting into lockdowns, vaccines became political symbols instead of public health tools, which is wild when you think about it, because we're talking about a virus, not a Senate bill.
It got to the point like where someone wearing a mask could technically predict your voting tendencies. Like forget polls, discount the mask as at a local grocery store.
Yeah, and that election year really amplified everything. You had those campaigns and media outlets on both sides weaponizing COVID-19 narratives, and all these scientific facts got interpreted through like political lenses rather than scientific ones.
Yeah, and a perfect example is the famous pandemic video. It spread even faster than the virus itself on Facebook.
Yeah, man, I remember that. I think that's because that video hit like every psychological trigger that exists. You had a whistleblower figure, you had shadowy elites, not to mention dramatic music and the claims of like some hidden truth behind all of this. And on top of that, it was posing as a documentary, but it didn't really have any of this real substance that a documentary has in reality.
I remember when I watched that video, it was like binge watching a conspiracy thriller, except real people actually believe it. And it got tens of millions of views before platform even figured how to respond that.
Yeah, it capitalized on pre-existing anxieties, distrust in big pharma, belief that elites manipulate events, and that scientists are like part of some grand cover-up.
I agree. Another huge factor we can talk about is the online communities, those Facebook groups, subreddits, and private Telegram channels. All of these became accelerators for news, for the rumors basically. You had people who never probably interact in real life, and now all of a sudden they all suddenly gathered around shared fears in a group chat.
Yeah, online preference were like, oh, you like a post about vitamins? Like, let me give you tons of groups that also just give you recommendation things that hospital also a scammer.
Yeah, and once somebody enters those online echo chambers, the misinformation gets reinforced constantly. Memes, screenshots, out of context clips. It's basically the rapid fire reinforcement of the wrong news.
Yeah, those conspiracy theories are already like crazy, but there's this another conspiracy, the whole 5G conspiracy. Even though 5G towers have absolutely nothing to do with COVID-19 or immune system, some groups instead, they were either triggering the virus or transmitting it electronically.
Yeah, when I think about that story, I think it does not make sense, and also in some way we believe people might educate it, but also people may in a way like dumb when it comes like a sort of like we have these pandemics, like transmitting it electronically. Is COVID even Bluetooth enabled?
Yeah, and if my memory is correct, I remember those tower burnings were happening mostly in the UK, but the funny thing is those theories were fueled by US based, like they were fueled heavily by US based misinformation networks like the US influencers who are promoting the idea despite being in the US instead of the UK, and those YouTubers who are analyzing evidence. And then on to top it all off, you had those Facebook comments too, from what I remember.
Yeah, and we can't talk about the US without talking about vaccines.
Hmm.
The anti-vaccine movements in the US already existed long before COVID, going back to the 1990s and even earlier.
Yeah, Sean. And I think these rumors, like, they grew out of like medical mistrust, misinformation about autism at a certain point in US history, and a general trend towards alternative medicine. You have a lot of those people in the US. So when these COVID vaccines arrived, I guess the network for spreading rumors had already had its own infrastructure to mobilize.
It was like the machine was preheated, and then the COVID hits, and then it was ready to get baked.
Mm.
Yeah, what stands out the most is like how everyday actions become political. Wearing a mask became a statement, social distancing became a statement, like even listening to scientists became a political act as well.
Yeah, public health really did get absorbed into cultural wars. Two people could see the same exact scientific research and announcement and then like interpret it through either responsible leadership or like authoritarian overreach. I remember that.
And also, what we have to notice that influencers didn't help. While some maybe used their platform to spread evidence-based advice, but also a lot of these influencers, they used the pandemic to build the followers by promoting skepticism or anger, and the outrage sells.
Yeah, that's true. But to summarize all of this, in a bigger picture way, in the US, high polarization made people interpret events through political identity. Election year tensions amplified and weaponized narratives. Online communities created echo chambers. Long-standing distrust of government, pharma, and institutions acted as a fuel. Individualistic culture meant people resisted collective restriction more, and also media fragmentation meant no shared truth space for Americans to start from.
Exactly. The US wasn't just hit by a pandemic, you could say it was hit by infodemic, and with misinformation spreading just as aggressively.
Honestly, at one point, it felt like there were two pandemics happening at the same time: the virus itself and the battle over what the virus even was.
Yeah, both were hard to contain, but I think the second one were quite fast compared to the first one. Okay, so that's enough on the US. Let's head a bit south. Let's head to Brazil. It's another country where COVID-19 conspiracy theories didn't just spread, they went viral. And for reasons that were similar to the US, but they were also deeply tied to Brazil's own political and cultural landscape.
Brazil case, I think, is very interesting because unlike some countries where misinformation spread from fringe group, in Brazil, a lot of the biggest conspiracy actually amplified or originated from the political leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you guys remember when like the president at the time called COVID a gripe sinha or a little flu? That single phrase itself shaped public attitudes for months. When the top leader downplays a pandemic, it sends a signal to millions of people that they don't need to take the virus seriously.
Yeah, and once that narrative became normalized, it opened up the floodgates. Suddenly, you had people saying things like, well, if the president isn't worried, why should I be? And it almost created this permission structure where it allowed people to ignore experts and prioritize like personal instincts.
Yeah, Brazil's situation was this strange blend of political identity, macho culture, and mistrust. And when leaders mock masks or belittle restriction, it becomes part of the national conversation. And once something enters that arena, it spreads like wildfire.
Yeah, also another major aspect was the promotion of unproven treatments. Things like COVID kits filled with medication that had no solid evidence of effectiveness. These were treated almost like a patriotic alternative to global scientific consensus.
Right. And the problem is that when people believe that they already have a cure, they become less cautious and it creates a false sense of security. Another thing we have to talk about is WhatsApp, because in Brazil, WhatsApp isn't just a messaging app, it's basically the national communication pipeline.
Exactly, like WhatsApp in Indonesia also, we use it every day. I think it becomes majority of the social media that we use, families, churches, neighborhoods, workplaces, everyone has a group chats. And once misinformation enters those groups, it spreads fast. There's no algorithm to blame. It's just like people like to forwarding messages from their aunt, whose cousin's neighbor works at the hospital.
Yeah, and misinformation often came disguised as like voice notes or blurry screenshots claiming insider knowledge. Like this formats feel personal and trustworthy, which makes them even like more powerful and dangerous.
Yeah, and on top of that, WhatsApp is end-to-end encrypted. It's great for privacy, but it's terrible for debunking lies.
Yeah.
One of the biggest conspiracy theories in Brazil is like what the claim hospital were inflating COVID numbers to get more funding, and the belief that doctors were intentionally misclassifying these deaths.
Yeah, and that's a dangerous conspiracy because it undermines trust, not just in like politicians, but also in healthcare workers. These people actually risk their lives to save more lives.
Another common narrative was that the lockdowns were politically motivated. It's not about saving lives, but then about sabotaging the economy and like harming the president's image. Note the time right now, so you don't have to look through the entire podcast later.
To the podcast again, my internet was bad, that's why I got lost. So this theory played on Brazil's long-standing political rivalries, and people interpreted health measures through political loyalty and not science.
Yeah, then there was this vaccine misinformation. Brazil didn't just have any like anti-vaccine content, it had nationalist anti-vaccine content.
Yeah, it had things like foreign vaccines are dangerous, or the Chinese vaccine will alter your DNA. It all tapped into pre-existing geopolitical tensions, if you ask me.
And that's exactly what makes Brazil unique. Misinformation became wrapped in national identity, and supporting certain vaccines was seen as supporting certain political factions.
Yeah, religious leaders, I'd say, also played a major role, both in positive and negative ways. Some helped spread accurate info, but majority of them actually told followers things like faith protects better than the mass.
Yeah, and because of that, religious communities are strong in Brazil. Those messages carry real influence. Like when spiritual authority conflicts with science authority, like people often choose the one that feels closer to their identity, and mostly it's the spiritual authority.
I think Brazil is such a powerful example of what happens when official messaging doesn't line up with the scientific evidence. When the leaders send one message and the healthcare professionals send another, people get confused. And the confusion is the perfect incubator for the conspiracy theories to grow.
Exactly, Aldi. I agree. Mixed messages always result in mixed reactions, and then some people take extreme precautions, others just choose to ignore everything. Misinformation will fill the gap.
Yeah, and because of that, Brazil paid a very heavy price for that confusion. It shows that misinformation isn't just an online problem, it's a public health issue with real life consequences. And now, let's jump over to France, our third stop, a country famous for pastries, art, and a long standing tradition of shrugging dismissively at anything the government says.
Oh, yes. French didn't wake up in 2020 and suddenly decide to mistrust the government. The country where skepticism towards state institutions is practically a national sport. They do strikes the way other countries do brunch.
Exactly. There's a deeper cultural pattern here, though. French citizens have had a long history of questioning state authority, as we learned in our lectures and all back in uni. Whether it's the monarchy, presidents, health ministries, or major political parties, this skepticism existed way before COVID-19 and it influenced vaccine hesitancy among many of French citizens.
Yeah, like even before the pandemic even happened, France consistently ranked as one of the most vaccine hesitant countries in Europe. Not necessarily anti-science, but generally, let's call it philosophically suspicious.
This is also the country where people protested traffic speed cameras. So imagine how they reacted to like the mask mandates.
Yeah. And when the pandemic did hit, the already present mistrust met with rapidly changing guidelines, I remember, from the French government and the French political party, that the masks aren't necessary, and that then after some time they say that masks are essential, and then now out of nowhere, masks are only allowed in certain places.
Yeah, one conspiracy that gained traction claimed that pharmaceutical companies were exaggerating the threat of COVID to profit from vaccines. This played into existing fears about corporate influence over public health.
But then again, this isn't random, yeah. France has already had like several medical scandals over the years, including especially involving these pharmaceutical products. So you could say that this public distrust isn't coming out of nowhere. When COVID arrived, it just reactivated and reopened those same old wounds.
Basically, the French people they thought that big pharma was hiding in the shadows, like throwing their mustache, plotting world domination through like overpriced injections.
Yeah.
And then came the hydroxychloroquine debate, a storm all by itself. A French doctor, Didier Raoult, publicly complained the drug as a COVID cure. Overnight, he became a household name.
Yeah, I remember him. His supporters viewed him as like a maverick scientist, bravely challenging the establishment, trying to fit the narrative, I think you could say. But he had critiques, and his critiques did say that he was spreading false hope. But medical advice became like a rebellion narrative in that era. So, are you with the state or are you with the renegade doctor who's in their lab coat?
When I say it, it was like watching a Marvel movie where the villain and the hero both claimed they were saving humanity, and the audience doesn't know which one to root for.
Yeah, Raoult's rise showed how, like, in France, like, scientific communication can quickly become a political theater, I'd say.
Let's move on then. Another conspiracy that spread was that claims that the French government was using lockdowns as a form of population control. The idea that state elites wanted to monitor citizens more closely.
I think this tied into much larger historical narrative, like France's long debates over personal freedom, privacy, and also the state power. Anytime surveillance or restriction enter the conversation, the French readers start to like beeping.
Yeah, like, and the fact that the rules changed frequently, sometimes with even little warning, only like fueled the suspicion even more. Even people who weren't conspiracy-minded felt confused or even frustrated.
And one unique thing about France I want to add is how intellectual the debates were if you actually analyze it. In some countries, the COVID conspiracy theories were spreading through memes, but in France, they were spreading through 3-hour debates on like late night talk shows and all.
Exactly. French intellectual culture means people don't just debate what is happening. They debate the philosophy of what is happening, and there are layers like onion or like croissant.
Yeah, and social media amplified all of this, especially these platforms like YouTube, where long-form political commentary is very popular. People basically consume like hours of content questioning government motives and like scientific guidelines and policies.
Yeah, and so, like, to summarize everything, like, in France, conspiracy theories found fertile ground because of the long-standing distrust of government, anti-pharma sentiments rooted in past medical controversies, conflicting and sometimes even like confusing scientific communication, and lastly, a cultural tendency to question authority, and then question why they're questioning it.
In other words, France didn't just have conspiracy theories. France debated conspiracy theories with philosophical nuance, a glass of wine, and maybe a cigarette.
Yeah, in the end, it showed how deeply these cultural patterns shape the narrative, shape when narratives thrive. France wasn't just driven by like a fear of technological or religious divides. It was driven by skepticism and you could say identity and their own history as well. Okay, so that's it for France. Let's move on to Indonesia, a country Aldi and Sean are very familiar with. A country where religious-based conspiracy theories had a particularly strong influence during COVID-19.
Yeah, me and Sean, we think like Indonesia is one of the most religiously active countries in the world. Like the religion there isn't just a private belief here; it shapes daily routines, the social norms, community interaction, even political messaging. So it's like embedded into the fabric society.
Yeah, and during the early months of the pandemic, that influence became highly visible. Like some religious leaders and local community figures suggested that Muslims were less likely to catch COVID because of their prayer habits or faith, which is like, it's not true at all.
Yeah, in practical terms, that just created like a false sense of security. People were saying stuff like, I pray 5 times a day, so I don't need to wear a mask. Doesn't make sense.
And it
Yeah.
wasn't limited to one religion. Across different religion and faith groups, like similar narratives appear, like the idea that divine protection, ritual purity, and spiritual practice could replace these medical precautions.
Yeah, it's important to note that this wasn't always malicious. Many leaders genuinely believed they were giving hope or reassurance, but the effect was that public health measures were undermined in certain communities.
Yeah, and another common narrative that framed was that COVID-19 is a moral or divine punishment. Sometimes it's targeted at specific groups, if you ask me, and other times nations, entire nations, in fact, perceived it as like sinful and stuff.
So instead of like seeing it as a global health crisis, some people feel, I think it's not limited to Indonesia, but like if we're talking like globally, some people view COVID as a cosmic task. Are we good enough? Have we prayed enough? Did our country behave morally? That kind of question.
Yeah, and that moral framing could, sometimes replace evidence-based reasoning. If people thought it was like a punishment or a test from the god, they might ignore guidelines like social distancing or masking, thinking spiritual behavior mattered more.
Yeah, and then you have the fact that vaccines brought their own set of challenges. Rumors circulating claiming that COVID vaccine contained haram or forbidden like ingredients embedded in it.
Yes, and that's definitely true. Like even a small rumor like that can have a huge effect on the country where religious dietary laws and ritual compliance are integral to the daily life. So people weren't just questioning the vaccine scientifically, but also they questioning it morally.
Yeah, and even when religious authorities issued statements clarifying that vaccines were permissible, the misinformation had already spread through informal channels, making it hard to undo.
I think ultimately, like Indonesia, it shows like how the cultural and also religious influence these conspiracy narratives, and definitely different with the Western countries' narratives.
In the US, for example, like conspiracy theories were often driven by political polarization or distrust in government. In France, historical skepticism of the state and pharma played a huge role.
Okay, so you can say that in Indonesia, the cultural lens is deeply religious, and that people interpreted COVID through moral, spiritual, and divine frameworks, which in turn influenced their response to public health guidelines and vaccines in a way.
It is a powerful reminder that misinformation doesn't spread in an instant way. It adapts to the social culture and also religious context of like each country.
Yeah, exactly. And understanding the context is the key to designing public health strategies that actually work.
Okay, let's cut here. It's saying less than a minute. I think we need to
Okay.
start a new meeting.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, that's right. Boom.
Wait, let me end the meet.
Yeah. So after touring the US, Brazil, France, and Indonesia, what can we actually learn from looking across these different countries?
Yeah, so the first big takeaway is this: conspiracy theories are global, but their forms are local. The virus may have been universal, but the stories people told about it were shaped by their own society's fears, values, and history.
Exactly. Like in the US, the conspiracy were deeply tied into like political identity, like the mask, the vaccines, and weren't just health measures, they become political symbols.
Yeah, and in Brazil, it was more about leadership influence when official messaging from the top dog conflicted with science, and people were left adrift, and misinformation rushed in to fill the void.
Yeah, and also like in France, historical mistrust of the state and anti-pharma sentiment created fertile ground for debates over lockdowns, vaccines, and the rebel scientists'
Well,
Mm,
in Indonesia, just that we discuss religious belief and moral frameworks play a huge role. People interpret COVID not just as a virus, but as a spiritual or moral test, which affected how they behave and responded to the public health advice.
mm. So, different countries, different narratives, but underneath it all, the same pattern emerges: uncertainty, fear, and a human need to find explanations. We're always wired to make sense of the unknown. I guess we can't help it, even if the explanations are inaccurate.
Yeah, and that's the really important part. Understanding like the local context of misinformation is very crucial. One size fits all solution, like just give people facts, rarely work.
Right. Like people don't believe misinformation because they're dumb. It's just like they believe it because it fits with their lived experience, like their fear or the narrative they already trust. Like humans are making sense. You are like humans, they're sense making machines. And sometimes the story is
Mm.
more comforting than the fact.
So basically, combating misinformation requires as much empathy as it requires science. And we also have to understand where people are coming from before we can offer them a better path forward.
Yeah, and it also shows like how interconnected the world is. Even though the narratives are local, misinformation spreads globally through social media. A conspiracy theory in one country can mutate and appear somewhere else in a new form.
And that's why, like from our discussion, like the global awareness is so important. If we only study the conspiracies in one country, we miss the pattern, like the methods and the solution that could help us elsewhere.
Also, let's be kind of honest, right? Reading about these conspiracy theories sometimes feels like you're binge watching like a dystopian TV series, but instead of fictional characters, you have like real people trying to figure out a pandemic.
Yeah, and I like Netflix, you can't just hit skip intro on misinformation. It keeps coming back in group chats, like or comment sections, and forwarded videos.
Exactly. But like if we pay attention, we start to see the patterns, and maybe and just maybe we can slow the spread, like one conversation at a time.
Hmm. So, the lesson is clear, guys. Conspiracy theories are shaped by human culture, history, politics, and faith. They're not just wrong ideas that are floating around in cyberspace. They're deeply human responses to uncertainty.
Yeah, and understanding that as our first step in responding responsibly, globally and locally.
Remember, like misinformation doesn't spread because people all are gullible. It spreads because people are human.
And with that, thank you all for joining us on this global tour of COVID-19 conspiracy theories.
Stay curious, stay critical, and remember, questioning things is fine. Just don't believe everything you read in a WhatsApp group.
Or a TikTok video, or maybe a forwarded PDF. Well, you get the point.
Okay, so that's the ending. Now I think we'll put some music or something, and then there'll be another scene where we're saying like thank you and subscribe, I guess, right?
Okay, should we do that?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you all for listening to this episode of Pandemic Paranoia Podcast.
Well, if you have enjoyed today's global tour of COVID conspiracy theories, make sure to follow us on your favorite podcast platform.
Stay safe, stay curious, stay critical. See you next time on Pandemic Paranoia Podcast.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Okay, yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Finally.
Damn,